Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, one and all, to the latest edition of the Blitz Network Radio. I think we've lost count of the number here. I just remember that we did the Peanut Tillman episode a long time ago, and even then I didn't know what the number was. Rob had to remind me.
33.
Right, well, I knew before that, obviously. That's why it was the Peanut Tillman episode. But anyway, as I've been so rudely interrupted by my co-host, I'm Adam Hess, and that is my co-host Robert Zaglinski. Robert, how are you?
I'm doing well, Adam. I find that I can count this evening. How about you?
I find that I can count as well. However, I don't keep track of the episodes, and you've been cheating on me and recording with other people.
So. Hey, you like Kyrie too? Come on, dude.
That's true. That is true. I like Kari. He's great. Definitely better at breaking down football than myself, so I won't blame you there. But speaking of breaking down a little football, we have not done a podcast since the Bears draft, so we're going to kind of do a quick little rundown at this point. There's, anything that can be said about the Bears draft class has probably been written or said or recorded in some way. Obviously the main coup or main grab for the Bears in the draft was third-round pick David Montgomery, whom they traded up with the Patriots to take. They also added Riley Ridley in the fourth round, and then added some interesting wild cards in Duke Shelley, Kareth White Jr., and Steven Denmark. That's him. In the sixth and seventh rounds. Which, first of all, I have to say, I'm very impressed with the names the Bears have coming out of this draft.
Yeah, I like the guys that they got in late rounds. I'm still obviously skeptical of most of those guys really ever becoming like a thing, just considering their draft status, just considering like the historical hit rate of those kinds of picks. But for sixth and seventh round picks, guys like Duke Shelley, guys like Kareth White Jr., guys like Steven Denmark, I mean, the Bears did pretty well. Even Riley Ridley. I mean, Riley Ridley was someone that had a second-round draft grade at him, and they got him in the fourth round. One of the best route runners in this year's draft, probably the most important thing you can do as a receiver. And the Bears just sat there and got him in the fourth round. So I think the best thing that Ryan Pace does, obviously we've harped on it for a while now, for a few years now, is get value in the late rounds. And if he can start to turn sixth and seventh round picks into viable starters and contributors, well, I don't really know how anyone's going to overcome the Bears becoming like a consistent NFC force, because no one turns sixth and seventh round picks into viable starters. No one.
Yeah, I think ultimately, if you basically can turn a sixth or seventh round pick into just a special teams contributor, someone who can contribute and when called upon, but not necessarily, like you said, no one really turns them into starters. Obviously the Bears ended up with kind of a diamond in the rough in Charles Leno, but other than that, it's very rare to find the seventh round pick that turns into something super consistent. And I don't have the stat in front of me, but I know for a fact that something that like more than half of fourth round picks don't even see out their rookie contract. I can only imagine how many seventh round picks may not even make the team. So to be able to get someone who can at least make the team and contribute in some way at some point it can be a major win. And obviously, I don't know if you've ever seen the graphic, which I think is super hilarious, but there's a graphic about David Montgomery. I have it in front of me, but it says he has the feet of Saquon Barkley, the vision of Le'Veon Bell, the strength of Zeke Elliott, and the athleticism of Sony Michel. So basically the Bears got the best running back of all time in the third round. So big win for Ryan Pace.
Yeah, big win for Ryan Pace. Ryan Pace is at this point where everything he touches turns into gold because he won one division title, Adam. That's right. How this works now.
Ryan Pace is playing 7-dimensional chess while everyone else is playing hopscotch.
What would 7-dimensional chess even look like? Is that just like, are you just using a Rubik's Cube?
Rubik's Cube. I think we just have to ask Dr. Strange.
Dr. Strange would know. Yeah, with Montgomery, I mean, I kind of avoided it at the start, but, he's going to be a good player. I mean, I have no doubt that he's going to be the guy that can get you 1,500 all-purpose yards, score 8 to 10 touchdowns. I mean, he has that skill set. He has that ability. I'm just not going to agree with the process. I I appreciate Ryan Pace's conviction in getting franchise-altering players. The Bears wouldn't really be in this position if he didn't do that with Khalil Mack, but Khalil Mack plays the second most important position in football. I'm not going to appreciate the process when it's for a running back. To me, and by many verifiable metrics, the most replaceable offensive position, maybe the most replaceable position outside of linebacker in football. So, Montgomery might churn out a good 3 to 4 years, might churn out a good 7 to 8 years. He turns a lengthy career out with the Bears, but that doesn't make the process worth it. That doesn't make his impact any less worth it, because you can find guys like that easier later on. You can find guys the Bears realistically could have waited. They didn't have to trade up to get him, and they still could have gotten another guy who would have likely produced just as much. The Patriots sat back. I've said this on numerous podcasts and shows at this point. The Bears could have sat back and got someone like Damian Harris, which the Patriots did at number 87 overall. So,
yeah, and I'm actually glad you said that, because I actually said this on the day of the draft. And I mean, I mentioned Harris myself as someone I really liked, looking at his tape, looking at the measurables. I think he was a fit for what they wanted, almost to the same extent as David Montgomery. Now, I respect that, like you mentioned, and like everyone else has talked about, I respect that Ryan Pace has this no holds barred, no regrets mentality to go get the people he wants. But I definitely agree with you that the process of trading up to get a running back is certainly questionable. And you mentioned even like the Patriots traded back with the Bears and got Damian Harris at that 87th pick that the Bears had. As someone who had, as I mentioned, been a big fan of Damian Harris in the draft process, if the Bears had sat there and picked Damian Harris, I personally would have been thrilled with that. I think it would have been a great fit for their offense. And I think anytime you see that the Patriots pick up a player that you had high grades on, at least when I say myself, made me feel good about my own player evaluation, if I can just toot my own horn really quick. But yeah, I just think ultimately if David Montgomery can be their Kareem Hunt, and it's up to David Montgomery to prove Ryan Pace correct, just like it's been up to Mitch Trubisky to prove Ryan Pace correct, just like it's been up to Leonard Floyd to prove Ryan Pace correct, just like it's been up to Khalil Mack to prove Ryan Pace correct. And so far, most of those players, I would argue, have done that. So the process certainly has not necessarily hurt Ryan Pace. And I know you shared a tweet just today about how the Saints have traded up in, I think it was either 5 or 6 consecutive drafts, and that's kind of where Pace learned. So the no regrets mentality is certainly respectable. But when it results in trading up for a running back and giving up a future pick next year, a 4th round pick next year nonetheless, that's a little questionable to me.
Right, Adam, and the thing is with that trio you mentioned, I mean, Mitch Trubisky plays the most important position. If Pace thinks Trubisky's his quarterback, the guy that can lead the Bears to the promised land, which still remains to be seen, but he plays the most important position, go trade up for him. Leonard Floyd, I don't know how much I would classify him as this great pass rusher, but he's a pass rusher. He's an edge player. You trade up for those kinds of guys. Same deal with Mack, a future Hall of Famer. There's a clear distinction in going and getting those guys and ignoring the process of giving up picks and the running back. For me, and I really don't think this is hyperbole. For me, I think David Montgomery has to be the clear best running back of the 2019 draft for this have been truly worth it value wise in regards to what Pace gave up for him and Pace's conviction in getting him. Just if you compare it based off of the players that they passed up on that were still available later on in the 4th and 5th rounds and even in the 3rd round, if you compare it to everyone else that was there, Montgomery has to be the clear-cut absolute best running back in the 2019 NFL draft. And then I will shut up. But, we're not going to be able to know that for 2 or 3 years. So on its face, it just looks bad now.
Definitely. I agree. And I'm right there with you in terms of him needing to be the best back. And I don't get me wrong, I certainly think that that's a possibility, because the running back talent here, even though there was some running backs that went, obviously there was Josh Jacobs that went in the 1st round, that the Raiders used the 24th pick that they got from some team in some trade. I don't really remember.
I don't remember either.
Yeah. Khalil Mack. And they obviously took a running back in the first round, which even that is questionable. Obviously, running backs went in the second round, but there was no Saquon Barkley, no Zeke Elliott. There's no top level elite, no doubt star running back in this draft. So there's certainly a possibility that David Montgomery ends up being kind of a Kareem Hunt-esque find as the football player, as far as the football player goes, end up being an all-pro kind of talent found in that third round. It definitely can happen, especially because I think he is a good fit and does draw comparisons to Hunt within this offense. And, that's the kind of player that you're looking for. So it can happen, but I agree with you that it does have to happen in order for the Bears process to be proven I wouldn't say viable, but be proven a worthwhile one in terms of trading up for a running back.
I didn't mean to turn this into too much of a philosophical discussion, but I will digress before we move on to the next point. I do think people overvalue draft picks. I think you get this notion of absolutely getting as many hits at the board as possible is overblown, because you can have 12 hits at the board, and if you only hit one of them or you hit none of them, it didn't matter anyway. But that's the point in itself of getting those hits at the board, that you want, because no matter how good a scout is, no matter how good an evaluator is, even Bill Belichick, the greatest coach, the greatest general manager, the greatest really probably salary cap magician in NFL history, even he misses on scouting. Even he misses on personnel and prospects, but he leaves himself so much breathing room to work with, just an assortment of 8 to 9 to 10 draft picks every single year, because he knows he's going to need that breathing room. I know Ryan Pace is drafted very well, but to continue to just give yourself a little bit more flexibility. I think the Bears right now are loaded up in the 2020 draft, but knowing Pace, he's gonna trade away a lot of those assets to go up and get a guy he likes anyway, which I will have issues with. I'll undoubtedly have issues. That's a problem a year from now. We're a long ways away from the draft. We haven't even gone through the 2019 NFL season, but this starts a trend. We don't have to go from, oh my God, why are Pace and the Bears getting criticized so much for giving up the picks? And we don't have to go to the other side either. We can find that happy balance, like, oh, hey, let's not overstate the value of picks, but they're still important. Let's find that middle ground.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a really good point about people overvaluing draft picks, and that you certainly obviously you need them. That's how you build your team. And Ryan Pace has talked about being a team that builds through the draft, and the Bears have done that, I would say, very well. But at the same time, like you said, especially after like the first round, a lot of times it can just become kind of like we talked about lottery tickets in the past, and it can just become a little bit of a mystery box, and you're not sure exactly how much value there is in that, and you never know for sure until years after. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but at the same time, like we mentioned, trading a future pick and a fourth round pick, which can still be considered a valuable asset to move up for a running back, was questionable. But speaking of fourth round picks, you mentioned Riley Ridley earlier and how a lot of people had second round grades on him. I had some doubts in my mind about why, or I guess I should say questions maybe about how smart it was to draft a wide receiver, considering that the Bears have a pretty loaded wide receiver group already. But I think the more I've thought about it, that's a really great value pick there. Do you expect Riley Ridley to potentially step in and end up being a starter for this team?
I don't know if he's going to be a starter necessarily this year, but eventually, yes. Taylor Gabriel and Allen Robinson don't really have that much cap money left on their contracts after next season. And I highly doubt that the Bears are going to want to keep them around long term, considering in an ideal world, some of the contracts they're going to have to give out to Eddie Jackson, a first-team All-Pro safety, arguably their second-best defensive player, to Mitch Trubisky, just a standard big quarterback contract that every quarterback gets now. That's even remotely competent. Cody Whitehair is someone that's been talked about a lot this offseason as someone that's having a deal done. They're going to have to move stuff around. They're not going to be able to invest so much money in receivers. So the natural cutting block are guys like Robinson and Gabriel that have double-digit cap hits or close to it. Ridley, to me, was a move not only of a luxury, and that was not only a luxury pick, but was preparing for that reality. I think they know that they can kind of let him sit on the sidelines this year, and then slowly maybe ingratiate him. He's a little bit more polished as a route runner. Let him get involved in the offense as the year wears on, and then by 2020 he can be a full-time starter. Maybe they move on from Gabriel. Maybe they move on from Robinson. I'm not suggesting that they absolutely will in 2020, but it's definitely a possibility, and that to me is a sign that they're getting ready for it. I mean, that's what a good team does, and luckily for their sake, Riley Ridley isn't a 45-year-old rookie like his brother, so he has plenty of time to develop.
Yeah, absolutely. 100. Definitely. You cannot draft senior citizens like Calvin Ridley.
Yep.
So I'm really glad that they went more along in the young route. And you mentioned Taylor Gabriel. I just pulled up Taylor Gabriel's over the cat page here. Very reliable source. Obviously, we have our own Brad Spielberger, our cap expert who works there as well. And looking at Taylor Gabriel's contract, now keep in mind he's 28 years old. I think he actually turns 29 later this year, so he'll be 30 by 2020. And in the 2020 year, the Bears can save $4.5 million and have just $2 million worth of dead cap money if they cut him. So I think that the Riley Ridley pick is definitely the writing on the wall for Taylor Gabriel, especially just with Anthony Miller. The plan is for him to emerge this year and kind of maybe take that role. So I think that Riley Ridley can kind of step into that, into that position as well. And in the same mold, obviously the Bears made one of the bigger undrafted free agency signings in grabbing Emmanuel Hall from University of Missouri. That was a pretty big win for them. A lot of people had 4th round grades on Hall. Do you think that there's a chance that Hall makes the team?
I would be pretty surprised if Emmanuel Hall didn't make the team. Really, the only thing that is a knock on him, the only reason that he went, that he was an undrafted free agent was because he has undrafted free agent hamstrings. He has injury issues, and that's a common thing for a lot of receivers that kind of maybe have to refine their movements a little bit and mitigate that. Everything else about Hall speaks to being the kind of quality slot/possession receiver. I think I've seen a lot of comparisons to him and former Bear Earl Bennett. That's a pretty good player you're getting if he's like your 3rd or 4th option, or if he turns into something a little bit more, especially in a diverse offense like the Bears are planning. I would be surprised if he didn't make the roster. Right now, the Bears have a very loaded receiving room. But Hall is certainly talented enough to crack their top 5 or top 6 or whatever they plan on keeping a playmaker.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. I think that the Hall signing, I had high hopes for Javon Wims coming into this year and hoping that he would make the team and step into a bit more of a role. But I think the Hall signing is kind of the writing on the wall for Wims, in that if he doesn't have another huge preseason where he's one of the best players on the field every time he's out there, like he was in last year's preseason, kind of flashing at times, there's definitely the writing on the wall that I think Hall fits the offense a bit more and will definitely be someone who can kind of take that spot. The Bears can still maybe stash Wims on a practice squad, but I think that Emmanuel Hall is someone who I would consider a favorite to make the team. Along the same lines, I'm actually, believe it or not, Rob, I was a little bit more impressed with the Bears' undrafted free agency class. Along with Hall, they added a tight end. Is it? I'm going to say Dax. Is that it? Dax Raymond? I don't know why it's
Dax Raymond.
Dax Raymond.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
It was definitely slipping my mind there, and I was going to say he's someone I think that's going to make the team. And then on top of that, they got offensive lineman Alex Bars, and then the intriguing edge from Canada, Matthew Betts, who's been getting a little bit of attention. So I was almost more impressed with some of those UDFA signings, considering that, again, Emmanuel Hall had 4th round grades. Raymond probably should have been a draft pick, and Alex Bars had some 4th round or 5th round grades as well. So I was impressed. I think that those are 3 guys in Hall, Raymond, and Bars that I actually project as making the roster once the preseason ends. And Betts is kind of a on the fringe guy, again, someone who's been getting a lot of attention. I was not necessarily seeing that coming. The Bears typically hadn't been super active in terms of adding high impact, high priority undrafted free agents. Obviously, they had a hit with Bryce Callahan a couple of years ago. But were you surprised by the level at which they were involved and the kind of talent they were able to bring in?
I mean, I think they've tried to be active on the undrafted free agent market in recent years, but part of it is that it's a two-way relationship. So the undrafted free agents actually have to want to sign with you. You can't just have an interest in say, oh, hey, we're going to give you a shot. We're going to give you a 1-year contract. You're going to come into a competition or whatever. There actually has to be an incentive where they want to join your culture. They want to join your building. They want to play with your team. When the Bears are finishing 7-9, 6-10, 5-11 under John Fox and Mark Trestman, whatever, and they're an absolute embarrassment and laughingstock. Who wants to play with that? I mean, if I'm an undrafted free agent, maybe I have a better chance of playing on a bad team, but that's not certainly an environment I'm going to enjoy. That's not the kind of place I want to work in. When you're coming off an NFC North title, when you have when you're at the start of a Super Bowl window that's going to last for the next 2 years, ideally. Guys want to be a part of that. Guys want to compete and see where they have a chance. And, Emmanuel Hall and Dax Raymond, they're at positions that might have openings soon enough. And those other guys, they want to be a part of a winner. And I know this is a thing that many that follow the Bears and many that have been really emotionally invested in this team have to still get used to. But people want to play for the Bears. The Bears have, even off of one season, they've established themselves as a relatively premier franchise. Again, I think you have to do it personally just to show that it's sustainable for at least one more year. But they've done enough to change it from the players' perspectives. They've done enough to change it from that mass appeal perspective, and that speaks volumes.
Yeah, and I think along the same lines, the Bears, with obviously having limited draft capital, only having 5 picks coming into the draft, obviously ending up, being able to pick 5 players despite trading up in the 3rd round and back from the 5th into the 6th round as part of that Montgomery trade. They had to be active in undrafted free agency in an effort to add some potential impact players that can make this team. And I think that even adding one of those 3 players that they did, if you can get an undrafted free agent, a priority undrafted free agent that has a chance of making your team, and obviously there's a long way to go before any one of those guys makes the team. But if even one of them makes the team, that's a win when you have limited draft picks. And if you end up with 3 undrafted free agents, or potentially even 4, depending on how Betts does in competition and come training camp time, there's a lot of potential for that to be a huge win for the Bears, ending up, again, having limited draft resources to be able to add premium talent after the fact as well, and get multiple guys who had, early day 3 grades. That's a huge, huge win. And I think, like you said, it speaks to the culture that they've built. I saw a quote from Emmanuel Hall that said that a lot, he could tell when coaches at other places didn't necessarily want the best for him. And he thinks that all of the Bears coaches want the best for him. When you have that kind of leadership at the helm of your organization, as a fan, it makes it a lot easier to root for that team, and it makes it a lot more fun to root for that team as well.
I mean, as someone who covers this team, it's certainly much more fun to watch a more enjoyable team. I mean, it's better than watching the muck. It's better to actually watch guys enjoy doing their job than just kind of going through the motions of the last 5 years. It's nice to see others wanting a part of that. My official stance, really, Adam, on the Bears' entire draft and then their entire undrafted free agency class is that they got a steal with each of their picks. Wow, they're going to be good. They might be a star. They might be superstars. And the Bears roll. That's my official stance there.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. The Bears, absolute superstars, won, every single one of them.
Hey, could be.
You never know. You never know. Speaking of potential superstars, and definitely guys who want to earn some jobs in training camp competitions, and definitely the one that's been getting the most attention since before the NFL postseason even ended, the Bears kicking situation. They brought in 8 total kickers to minicamp. 8 kickers, Rob.
Is that a lot?
I think that's a lot. Now, only 4 of them were officially under contracts, and they ended up only keeping 2, those being Elliott Fry and Chris Blewett, after the whole situation, especially after 8 kickers. Of 8 kickers, 6 of them missed 43-yard field goals. on the first day of minicamp. And Matt Nagy said they knew damn well why it was 43 yards. Thanks for continuing to rub it in our faces. I know, just for a second, I know Matt Nagy kind of took the time in a press conference to say that it's okay to talk about the parky kick. But for me, it's still not okay to talk about the parky kick. It still hurts.
I was going to go with a different angle for a second, but you can continue on with your.
No, you go with your different angle. You can go through different angle. I was just going to say that was just an aside.
I'm going to put it on my incredibly qualified psychoanalysis hat with the degree that I didn't earn from any university in regards to any therapy or analysis of the human mind, and I think it's still lingering on a lot of the Bears' minds, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
I think it's a healthy thing.
I think it's a healthy thing. Sure, but to do that with the 8 kickers you're bringing in to kind of like make that a big thing. Oh, hey, we're gonna do the 43-yard kick. Like a kicker's mind, you will like. Did you not learn your lesson with Cody Parkey? And this is not me defending Cody Parkey, but this is really how every kicker is, where they have a very, very fragile state of mind. Like that's not that I don't need the degree to say that. Like they have a very fragile state of mind, and you want to keep that as like balanced and even keel as possible. Why immediately put the onus and all of that pressure right away? I mean, they're gonna have to face the pressure eventually anyway, but why do that to kind of get them on the team? Like that's, to me, that isn't the way to approach that. I know we're way past that rookie minicamp fiasco now, and the Bears have narrowed down their search, but it feels like it's lingering a little bit too much in there. Like, okay, let's it's like it happened. You lost the playoff loss, but like you have that playoffs, but let's not like let it define the rest of what should be your Super Bowl window. Let's not dwell on it so much. Let's not pass that on to the next kicker necessarily. Let's assuage them a little bit and move on properly. It doesn't. It's very early. I mean, right now, what is it? May 8th. We're recording this on May 8th. But let's take this a little bit easier.
Yeah.
My drift.
And at the same time, I know I just talked about how it's not okay to talk about the Cody Parkey kick, but when they were saying, "Oh, the kickers missed a 43-yard field goal," I thought, "Oh, well, 43 yards kind of stinks." And then everyone was talking about how that was the Parkey thing. I kind of forgot that the Parkey thing was 43 yards. And when you're in a rookie minicamp, I don't know how much attention those guys really paid to the Bears to where they knew for sure that it was 43 yards. All I really remember is that it was a missed field goal and it was a double doink. I didn't remember the yardage. And again, all the guys that they're kicking in front of are not the guys who remember that, and are not like most of those guys there. We mentioned that the 3 guys that we think might make the team. So you have 3 guys who may be impacted, in the future even by the Cody Parkey miss. And then you have these kickers trying to live up to expectations. It was kind of strange.
Like, it wasn't a thing until Nagy said specifically when asked about it, oh, they know what it's about. So, okay, so it's a thing now. And you're passing it on to guys that haven't kicked in a year in a professional or collegiate setting. Eddie Pinero, the guy they traded for with the Raiders, Chris Blewett, Elliott Fry. I mean, you're putting the onus on them unnecessarily. Like you're letting it creep in. You are letting it creep in much more than it should. Let it be a motivator, but let's just dial it back. Just dial it back. I mean, that's really my thing here. Just dial it back.
Definitely. Now, to kind of get back on to the topic of it, now you mentioned the Bears trading for Eddie Pinero, or Pinero, however you pronounce it, the kicker from Oakland, who had been at the University of Florida previously, has the video of him making an 81-yard field goal, which is actually extremely impressive. And so now, and I mentioned also that they obviously kept Fry and Blewett around. So the Bears are now down to a 3-leg race. Get it? Get it? To win the kicking job. Thank you very much. So Rob, obviously the Bears have been kind of going this young guy. They're trying to kind of find the diamond in the rough, which it's worked for several teams with guys, for example, whose I have names escaping me like you wouldn't believe right now, but the New Orleans kicker, Will Lutz, the Philadelphia kicker, Jake Elliott, Kansas City's kicker is Harrison Butker, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay, I don't know why these names are struggling to come to mind right now, but those teams obviously kind of took the same approach and found franchise kickers, if you want to call them that. The Bears are taking this approach where many people, especially after the Robbie Golden news came out that he wanted out of San Francisco, so many people got on the bandwagon of just trading a pick for Robbie Gold, no matter what pick it was, and lock up that position because it was so obvious. What is your take on this approach? I personally like it. I like that they're kind of going outside the box, trying to find a potentially cheap replacement at that position and someone that they can maybe lock down for a while. But what are your thoughts on it?
I mean, it's the right approach. It's better than what they've done in the past few years, where they hand a guy, they basically hand the job to a guy like Connor Barth or a guy like Cody Parkey. Now Cody Parkey, they handed it to him because they gave him a very rich free agent deal, but it was just the process of that. They didn't really make they didn't really make any guy earn it. They didn't really make any guy step in and take the job for himself, and they obviously quite dearly paid for that. Well, I have issues with how they've initially handled it in terms of off-season activities, in terms of bringing in who they have already and how they're going to have them pit up against each other. This is something they should have been doing 3 years ago. So I have no qualms about it. If you want Robbie Gold at this point, then you probably want the Bears to trade a mid-round pick. And if you want the Bears to trade a mid-round pick for a kicker, you're probably the same person that still thinks running backs are very valuable in the NFL. And I'm going to need you to sit down so I can talk to you very calmly and rationally about why that is so wrong.
Well, you're also asking the Bears, sorry to cut you off, but you're also asking the Bears to commit about $9 million to the kicker position when you can factor in the amount of money they still owe to Cody Parkey.
Well, the money shouldn't be so much an issue if it's a short-term commitment, but it's still the draft pick. Like, you're going to give up a third or a fourth or maybe even a fifth-round pick for a kicker? Really? Let's dial it back, guys. Like,
right. I honestly, legitimately would rather draft a kicker with that than trade it for Robbie Gold, if that makes any sense.
Draft a 22, 21, 23-year-old kicker that has a decent career ahead of him, and then maybe, if it works out, you extend him, you keep him here. Then what? Robbie Gold is 39, 38? I understand he's still one of the ongoing best kickers in the league, but even he isn't worth a mid-round pick. Even he isn't worth whatever the cost it would be draft-wise to get him back into Chicago. That is, even if the 49ers would trade him to the Bears, which I highly doubt they're going to do, and which I highly doubt the Bears are going to pursue at this point.
Yeah. Now, obviously, we just talked about liking this approach. Do you think I tend to believe that the process still is not over. I think that there can still be potential for the Bears to bring even more kickers in. I mentioned a couple months ago on a podcast that I would not be even shocked to see them bring in maybe like 4 or 5 kickers to compete in camp. Obviously, right now we have 3, and I believe their 90-man roster is full, but there's still potential to make some moves there. Rob, so between Chris Blewett, Elliott Fry, and Eddie Pinheiro, I don't know how much you know about these guys, but would you place any money, or would you bet on one of these guys being the Bears kicker once the NFL season starts?
Are we sure the NFL isn't banning kickers yet? Just before I say anything, are we sure that's not a thing? Are we sure they're not? We
can continue to hold out our hope, Rob. But the AAF died very quickly, and they were our best chance at kickers being phased out. If it succeeded there, it had a better shot in the NFL. But obviously, that was not going to work out. So, we wait.
I think right now, and again, it's May 8th. I think right now the Bears are probably leaning Chris Blewett. He just seems to be the favorite, the anointed one from everything I've heard. But I would bet on Eddie Pinheiro. Even trading a very late round pick for him speaks to me as, oh, hey, that's kind of the guy that we might have a stake on in the competition. It's very difficult to scout kickers, obviously. I mean, you don't see any draft analysts. You don't see draft Twitter like, oh, hey, let's talk about the motion on his foot and his ankle and the torque he gets on his extra points. Like, you don't see anybody going through game tape scouting kickers. The way you scout kickers is just how they carry themselves and their statistics. Pinheiro's statistics speak for themselves. Missed 2 extra points of 58 attempts in his career, 38 of 43 on field goals, has a decent leg. Obviously, you mentioned the 81-yard attempt. Only ever attempted a 150-yarder, but I mean, how many times are you asking a college kicker to make 50-yarders? So he certainly seems like the guy to lean on, the upside one, the upside person that you can kind of restore a little bit of confidence to and give another shot to. He's unproven, but so are Blewett and so are Fry. Blewett's only the favorite right now to me, just based off of they're probably most familiar with him.
I can't, Rob. I said it when they signed him. The kicker Blewett.
Oh, well, you can't get over the name?
I can't do it. You can't come off a season where your kicker blew it and then have a kicker named Blewett.
I mean, okay, but then what if he turns out to be one of the it could be an ironic name. What if he turns out to be one of the greatest kickers of all time, ironically?
I mean,
there have been ironic names in the NFL. I mean, I can't think of them right now, but I'm pretty sure there have been. I'm pretty sure. So, I mean, Chris, look, I don't even know if Chris Blewett is good. Anybody who's saying that they absolutely know that these kickers are good and that they're absolutely very confident in any of one of these guys becoming the next star, again, like I said, is lying, because you can't scout kicking. You need specific kicking specialists. The Bears brought in the kicking specialists to look into this, but anybody outside of that sphere doesn't know what they're talking about in regards to this topic. So, Chris Blewett might have an ironic name and it might not end up mattering. You might not even get the shot and they go with Panero. I'm just going to go with Panero just so it doesn't piss you off, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't piss me off if Blewett won the job. I mean, if he's the best kicker, he's the best kicker. But I don't know. I struggle with the idea of having a kicker named Blewett. And I do agree with your take that the Bears trading an asset for Eddie Panero kind of makes him the early favorite. Along the same lines, this is kind of maybe a little bit of a two-part question, but do you think one of these kickers are the Bears kicker come December? And is it the same kicker that wins the job? So it's kind of a two-part question there.
So when you say come December, just to clarify, you mean that
late in the season?
Like they're the answer and the Bears don't really have any kicking issues throughout the 2019 season?
Well, I guess no, I don't necessarily mean that, because I think I guess I kind of asked a two-part question. If your answer to the second part would be yes, it's the same kicker who wins the job, I think that would mean that the Bears have no kicker issues. But I guess what I'm asking is, do you foresee that the Bears may have to end up making a kicker change in the middle of the year? Obviously, it's a difficult question to answer because you don't know what's going to happen. That's why I'm making you it. It's May 8th, like you said. So
okay.
we're grasping at straws here.
Okay. I'm going to stake my negligible reputation on it and say that one of these three kickers will be the Bears kicker by December, and that they won't really have many issues in 2019.
You heard it here first, folks. Robert Zaglinski just said Chris Blewett's a Hall of Famer.
Yes, my negligible reputation just called one of these guys a Hall of Famer.
Is he a star? Could be.
Could be. Hey, your team rules. Your
Yes.
team rules.
All right. Now, again, we've talked a little bit. It's May 8th, so we are stretching here a little bit for things to talk about after the draft and rookie minicamp. But are there any? You wrote a little bit about this today, I believe, for Windy City Gridiron. Are there any key storylines?
Rock River Times, buddy. But go on.
Sorry, Rock River Times. I apologize. Are there any key storylines or key players that you think the Bears fans need to keep an eye on or need to just not forget about throughout this upcoming summer as we kind of get into the midst of baseball season and the Bears will kind of fade a little bit into the background?
Are the Bears going to fade into the background?
Well, in terms of like just absolute immediate attention, they'll be there when like training camps come around, but you won't be thinking about them every single day because if you're a baseball fan, you'll have baseball in front of you. There's hockey playoffs still going on. So for a little bit, for the purpose of the question, they'll be in the background a little bit.
Yeah. I think when, as I wrote, it's easy to focus on the absolute two glaring holes the Bears had this offseason, a kicker and running back, which is fine because you can kind of generally say, oh, hey, the Bears don't really have many other weaknesses. But that doesn't mean they don't have any other players that still have to kind of take that next step, that still have to develop, that still have to become the core players the Bears originally drafted them to be. If you think the Bears are so infallible, the only way they're going to be infallible is if some of these guys do evolve. Minicamp starts on May 21st, and I'm watching for someone like, say, Anthony Miller to become more of a viable number 2 option, perhaps a number 1 receiver in the Bears offense, and not fade away down the stretch the way he did last year. He was a touchdown machine just for, I believe, the first 2/3 of the year, where he had 5 touchdowns and had a decent amount of yardage for a guy that was a 3rd or 4th option, and then was really not targeted all that much down the stretch. Had his lingering shoulder injury nag away at him, and became a complete non-factor. The Bears traded up to get him. See, this is where that process comes back around. They traded up to get him in the 2nd round because they think he can be a superstar. This year, he has to start living up to that. He has to start producing like a relative star. He doesn't have to be like Antonio Brown, but he's got to start showing signs that he's a genuine playmaker to be feared that doesn't disappear for a month at a time. I want to see how he responds. I want to start reading stories about how he's in the best shape of his life, how he and Mitch Trubisky have this impeccable chemistry. I want to start reading about how he's refocused after fading away last December. All those cliche camp storylines. Feed that to me about Miller. I will probably ironically feed those same stories when I'm in camp in July. But he's, to me, one of the most important players they have on this roster, and don't forget him. If he doesn't take the next step, I don't think the Bears become an elite offense the way a lot of people seem to think that they're going to be in 2019. He has to be a reliable playmaker for them to jump into the top 10 in production offensively.
Yeah, I have high hopes for Anthony Miller. And I think that he's a guy.
That's not to say I don't have high hopes for him. I'm just saying that he has to do that.
Right? Yeah, definitely. And I agree with you. When I say I have high hopes, I think that I have high hopes in that, and I think that because of the high hopes for him, and obviously, the Bears talked a lot about how excited they were that even though they didn't have a 2nd round pick in this past draft, they had Anthony Miller. And obviously that's because they traded that 2nd round pick in order to get back into the 2019 or 2018 2nd round to grab Miller. So he kind of has to, I would almost say, prove himself worthy of that amount of confidence from the Bears that he was their guy. And I think, like you said, last year, I would call his rookie campaign a successful one. Was he featured extremely heavily in the offense? No, but he did have he's featured in a lot of the big moments, had a lot of the important touchdowns, had a good amount of touch. I think he had 7 touchdowns, which might have led the team. I think you just said that. I was kind of, did you say that?
I did say that.
Yeah. Okay. I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure you said that. I'm derailing us so bad on this episode, dude. It's terrible. I apologize to you and to the listeners.
People appreciate you, Adam, and your inability to count. It's okay.
I only hope that I can make it up in future episodes. But yeah, I think, again, like you mentioned, he's the kind of guy that you need him to step up into that role. And like I said earlier, he's someone that can maybe fill that kind of Taylor Gabriel role where he can kind of be taking the top off the offense, kind of, move him inside, outside, be a kind of a matchup nightmare. And I would like to see him maybe, obviously the Bears signed Cordell Patterson, or Cordero Patterson, however you say it. And they brought him in. I'd like to see Miller maybe have a little bit of that role, make the offense very ambiguous. And I would like to see him be a lot more featured this year. And then if I can kind of piggyback on it too, I really think that people need to start considering Trey Burton more of a threat in this offense. I think they need to start remembering how important he was for Mitch Trubisky last year, how he was kind of, I would almost say in some ways, his primary target and one of his safest targets whenever the ball went his way. Obviously, I think he kind of caught some negative attention for missing out on the playoff game against the Eagles. And some people, when he was asked about if it was anxiety related after his comments in New York, he said he wasn't sure, and people kind of took that and ran with it. But I think that Trey Burton is still going to be an extremely important part of this offense in the coming year. And I think he can have a big, big year.
I've seen people rather calling Burton overrated. Who thinks Burton's a superstar? I have He's a guy that catches 50 passes, maybe 500 to 600 yards and a few touchdowns a year. Like, that's fine. Unless I'm mistaken, I don't think anybody's overstated what he's capable of and his talent. If anything, to go along with you, they've understated how important he is. I think he's one of the most crucial players the Bears have offensively. I think he's they weren't a good offense by any means last year, but anytime they had success, anytime they went on one of their scoring binges or went on any one of those quality opening drives, especially in the first half of the season, Burton was heavily involved. Like, absolutely. Don't let a groin injury completely cloud your judgment on that. I feel like that's playing a bigger factor than I'd like to see, for sure.
Yeah, and like I said, I can see him being a big part of the offense, but kind of circling back to you, he's not a superstar. He's not a Rob Gronkowski. He's not a Travis Kelce, but no one really thinks he's that. No one expects that of him, but he is absolutely someone who's going to be a major role in this offense. And I think is in position to have a good year because people are kind of forgetting about him. And there's so much talk about Allen Robinson, Tariq Cohen, Cordero Patterson, Riley Ridley, David Montgomery. If you were talking about the biggest threats on the offense, I think you're listing 5 to 6 names before you get to Trey Burton. And then you remember how solid and reliable Burton is as a tight end and as a player and as a pass catching option for Trubisky, that it kind of, you almost realize, wow, like he actually could end up being more dangerous than you realize because he's not the first person you think of, or not even the 5th person you think of when you talk about dangerous options on this offense.
Ironically, I think people only nitpick at Burton because they're so concerned about what Adam Shaheen might be, which is entirely valid. But just because Shaheen hasn't yet panned out what the Bears thought he would be as a former second-round pick doesn't diminish any less of the player that Burton is and what he's capable of. You can't that there's no correlation and causation there. Like, Burton's fine and Shaheen doesn't have a demonstrative impact on his individual play. Like, we don't have to bridge that.
Right. Now, speaking of things that I think you have to bridge, there has been we're going to kind of move away from football, just so you know. We're going to talk about Game of Thrones.
God, do we have to?
Now,
no, we do. It just makes me so mad.
We have to talk about it. Now, I know how you feel about it, and you know how I feel about it. We talked a lot about this.
Hold on. For anyone that hasn't watched through the last 4 episodes of the season, obviously, big spoiler alert. Follow us on Twitter at The Bliss, and follow me on Twitter at Robert Zaglinski. Follow Adam on Twitter at _Adam Hess. If you don't want to listen to Game of Thrones spoilers, if you still haven't caught up, if you want to listen to 2 nerds talk about it, by all means, continue on.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now go ahead, Adam.
All right, now let's do this. Now, we've talked about Game of Thrones privately. Now we're going to talk about it publicly. Now, okay, I guess I'll just start with my perspective. Now, admittedly, I tend to be an eternal optimist. I usually just, if I watch something, if I watch a TV show, if I watch a movie, I just tend to enjoy them. That is just kind of how I am. It's kind of a disposition I have. With that said, I liked the first 3 episodes of this season. I know there was plenty of flaws, but I thought the first season was excellent setup, getting all the reunions out of the way that were necessary. Then the second season kind of built up to the fight. And then the 3rd episode, you had the big fight with the White Walkers, which I know many people had an issue with the fact that it just kind of ended with the Night King dying. It was all so sudden. But at the end of the day, it still, for me, delivered, and I liked the first 3 episodes. Then, this past weekend, the episode came on, and I felt like it was a waste of an hour and 20 minutes. I felt like they have ruined a lot of the character development, not just from the show. And even though in season 8, there's not much development left, but they've even turned on some of the stuff that they had going in season 8, even though there wasn't many complicated storylines in season 8. And all of a sudden, one episode really kind of spun this season on its head for me. And I go into the last 2 episodes of the series, when I say not knowing what to expect, it's because I don't know if I'm going to get a good episode that's going to deliver on the expectations I have, or an episode that's going to fall so completely short and make such little sense that I'm going to be stuck grasping at trying to figure out how they even thought it was a good idea.
I
know. Sorry, you seem lost for words, so I'm just going to say this. I know this one breaks your heart, but how do they turn Tyrion Lannister into a bad character?
They turned Tyrion Lannister. Tyrion Lannister was the most cunning, smartest person in Westeros. The guy with a heart of gold that wasn't loved by anybody, and they turned him into like this coward that all of a sudden bows down to royalty blindly out of fear, which Tyrion is obviously capable of fearing things and has feared things, especially in any of the big battle scenes he's been featured in. But he's not someone that bows down blindly to royalty. And they've like made him a mindless plot device. There's no depth to him. He's not the Peter Dinklage I love. He's the guy who jumps off of boats and is on the cover of Nirvana albums now. Like that's what he is. He's no longer compelling. He's ruined, and that's the kind of thing they've done with a good portion of their characters. I mean, Jaime finally going on his redemption tour, and I'm pretty sure he's going to King's Landing to kill Cersei. But damn, dude, you're taking the most roundabout way. Like, it just seems so forced how they're flipping that back around. Like, oh, hey, he finally gets with Brienne. He's finally happy. Oh, but hey, I have to go back and finish her off now. Why didn't you just go with the army? Are you gonna like? Why is he a plot device? You know. And it's just everything is so contrived. And this was something we talked about privately, where they're so concerned with setting up their next big battle. They're so concerned with setting up their next big spectacle that none of the filler matters anymore. None, which to say it shouldn't be filler. Everything in between the spectacles was why everybody loved Game of Thrones in the first place. It was why everybody loved the books in the first place. The detail, how no character had plot armor and could die at any moment when like you had those visual cues of, oh, hey, this person's getting killed. Like, there was so much depth and nuance and logic not in the sense of, oh, hey, I see so many people always making this point. I'm ranting a little bit right now. I see people always making this point of, oh, wow, I'm so sorry the series that has you riding dragons, I'm so sorry they didn't show us a sense of logic. Like, that, don't be lazy, don't be daft. You know what people are talking about when they say a lack of logic. When like Euron Greyjoy can appear out of nowhere 3 times in a row and decimate the supposed greatest army ever assembled, just because like somehow he always has the drop on Daenerys, who's 300 feet up in the air. Just like simple, basic, logically things like that, like things that don't make sense within the context of any dramatic plot or storyline. Yeah, and they've obviously done that now, where episode 5 is supposedly incredible and explosive and amazing. And then episode 6 will just be like, oh, hey, Daenerys. Oh, hey, Jon, blah, blah, blah. We ended on a downturn. Like,
right.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think my biggest thing, the biggest frustration for me, and you touched on it, just talking about the lack of plot armor for anybody, and also just the way that everyone had a story, and everyone's story was pretty consistent, and they always kind of had a goal in mind, right? And as we're getting there, I feel like everyone is kind of losing sight of what their main purpose was of the show. Now, Jon Snow, or Aegon Targaryen, however you want to refer to him, his big thing was always that he was, a leader that didn't necessarily want to be a leader, but people kept going to him. That's kind of continued. But as the show continued, he became the messenger about the upcoming threat of the White Walkers. And then all of a sudden the White Walkers are just gone. Now, I didn't necessarily think that it was a bad thing that a war with the dead could possibly end without the Night King dying. However, it coming as the third episode in the season instead of basically being the finale was kind of perplexing to me. I understand everyone rode north for the whole thing, but it, like you said, it was kind of like it was almost filler, and they just said, all right, we like the White Walkers were kind of always an afterthought on the show. So to me, it didn't ruin anything, but it kind of ruined the whole purpose of Jon Snow being there. And that all of a sudden it's like, okay, the only compelling side of him now is that he's a Targaryen and maybe has a claim to Dany's throne, or actually does have a claim to Dany's throne. And that's all I have. That's all he has going for him. There's nothing else compelling about him. It's just, hey, maybe in the end he's going to be on the throne, maybe not.
They're trying to sell this whole thing of Dany and Jon having a conflict and Dany becoming a mad queen, and like, why are we supposed to care about it now? Like, why is that a major point of contention? Like, it just feels like to your point, they're just erasing the backgrounds and the details of every character to kind of put their chess pieces in front of King's Landing just to set it up, just to balance it out for Cersei, just to make that and I'm doing air quotes, a fair fight there. And then because the throne matters so much, but the entire series, like, as much as the White Walkers maybe have been an afterthought, like, they haven't emphasized that the throne was important. If anything, they said that it's a construct that shouldn't matter. That, I mean, Daenerys herself said the wheel has to be broken, and then they have to reset the power structure. And
Right.
All of a sudden, it's a big thing that who's going to sit on it, and I see everybody debating on social media all the time, like, oh, hey, is it going to be Bran? Is it going to be Tyrion? Is it going to be Tyrion and Sansa? Why is that the main thing now? What even is the main conflict at this point?
I mean, I think arguably one of the most compelling thing, and like the whole point of it being a Game of Thrones, plural, was that throughout, particularly seasons kind of 2 through 4, 2 through 5, there was multiple thrones. There was people naming kings wherever they wanted. Yara Greyjoy was named the queen, and Jon Snow was named the king, and everyone was named kings wherever they wanted to be. And the Iron Throne became less and less important. Now all of a sudden, it's the focal point of the whole show. It doesn't make any sense to me.
It's just like, and even in balancing it out for Cersei too, like, I don't fully buy that argument either, because then you have things like, I know social media and I know our world places a very reasonable premium on dogs. They're the greatest. Like, you should, like, they're amazing. So everybody was perturbed when Jon didn't pet his dog Ghost. But that wasn't always just because he didn't pet the dog. That's also just because that was something out of character for him. And then their explanation read more like, oh, hey, that would have cost us some money to have him actually interact with a CGI construct. That leads me to believe that something like Rhaegal, and again, I mean, we're way past spoilers here, Rhaegal died because they didn't want Jon riding him, because that would have been also expensive for CGI. Like, Rhaegal didn't die to balance out the fight for Cersei. Rhaegal, I almost feel like, died because they didn't want to pay out the extra however much hundreds of thousands of dollars it would have taken Kit Harington to sit on top of Rhaegal.
Right. And then at the same time, it's like, then if you're concerned about CGI stuff, why are you CGIing a scene of them burning thousands and thousands of bodies? We didn't need to see that at the beginning of the last episode. We knew that all those people died. We knew that they were going to mourn them, but I didn't need to see them burning all those bodies. And the whole scene of there being thousands of piles of bodies, we know that that's all CGI. They've become so heavily reliant on CGI that for them to then talk about all the money of it is just kind of ridiculous, I think. And circling back to the storyline as well, like you mentioned, Dany becoming the Mad Queen, that was almost never a part of her storyline. It was always that she wanted such justice and she wanted to rule differently. Now all of a sudden she's just becoming just like what her father was, and it doesn't fit her plot line at all. And then you mentioned like having it be a fair fight for Cersei. There's nothing in Cersei's past that has ever suggested that she would need a fair fight. And you could almost make the case that now, with them having those giant dragon killing spear things, I think it has a name, but I forget it. It doesn't matter.
The ballista.
Thank you. Whatever it's called, I really don't care. But with them having all those, and now Daenerys and that army being down to one dragon, that's an unfair fight in the other direction now. So you've overbalanced the scales the other way, where okay, having all those weapons would have been compelling with 2 or especially 3 dragons, because they wasted the whole point of the Night King getting a dragon to begin with. That went basically nowhere with that. So now Dany's down to 1 dragon, and they have these giant dragon killing weapons that also were used to take down their ships, and probably could just be shot in general into a giant group of people and kill lots of people. So they have this giant weapon of mass destruction, if you will, whereas the people from coming down from Winterfell. Thank you. I was going to say Westeros, but I knew that was wrong. That's the whole country. People coming down from Winterfell, like Jon and Dany and all them, they don't have the Dothraki anymore. They've lost a whole lot of the Unsullied. I had to think about it, but they've lost a huge part of their army, and then they're up against the Golden Company. They've overtipped the scales in an effort to make it a fair fight, which I think it's supposed to be like an underdog story where it would have been much more compelling if Cersei's side had what they had, in terms of they prepared for this way, and Dany or Jon's side, however you want to refer to whoever the leader is of that side of it, that side still was at full power with all the Unsullied, all the Dothraki, all the dragons. Like, it would have been much more compelling in that. It's like, okay, we got power versus power here. Instead, it's just been a mess. They're trying to build up a false emotion by killing Missandei, and all of a sudden,
does
Grey
anyone
Worm
care about Missandei?
Well, only Grey Worm. And does anyone really care about Grey Worm? Grey Worm's whole point is that he's just a warrior. Why do I need I don't need an emotional drive for him. I just need him to be kick-ass, which he has been for most of the time. And Missandei was a fine character, but her dying does nothing for me. It's the big thing for me is that they're straying so far from what the characters were, and that's so frustrating.
I love that point about Cersei. Like, why not just have the armies relatively go as is? And Cersei, who has proven throughout the entire series, anytime she's had her back up against the wall, anytime someone has threatened her directly. I mean, you have, for the first instance, when Ned Stark tells her about the lineage, the king lineage, and about the entire plot, she doesn't waste any time. Like, she understands that this isn't just a game. Like, she understands how to politically underplay people. When she gets screwed over by the High Sparrows, how she just manages to construct everything around and reinvent herself with Qyburn and the Zombie Mountain, and then eventually blow up the Great Sept and destroy half the city to earn her freedom and earn her queenship. Like, she's someone that finds a way. Like, she's a little bit, you're to tip it so much in her favor, like, you're almost discrediting what she's capable of. Like, she's a very, very smart and resourceful person, a very smart and resourceful leader, and you've almost made her like this cartoon that needs to be overcompensated for. Like, Cersei could have handled herself. Like, something that would have been really cool is, oh, hey, that entire army makes its way to King's Landing, and like, there would maybe be like some, like, I'm just spitballing. There wouldn't necessarily have to go on like this, but Cersei would have found a way to use. I'm sure there's a lot of wildfire left, and she would have had like some reserves in some trenches, and had her soldiers use those ballistas to shoot them off, and it would have like blew up half the thing. It would have been a spectacle. But then again, maybe that comes up with the CGI. But that's that's something that would have been in line with her character. Like, she's much more capable than they're making it seem. Like, she's she should be credited for.
Right. And I think, don't get me wrong, if I'm going to credit them for any compelling character storyline, I do think that the storyline of Cersei kind of going from this fearless, cunning, always kind of finding her way character to now having a little bit of fear and a little bit of uncertainty as this time has come, especially after seeing the White Walker. I find that slightly compelling, but it's still taking away from what she was. And if I to kind of transition as we talk about more mass media, which I know we wanted to talk about this as well, I compare how they're wrapping up these character storylines to the way that Avengers Endgame wrapped up their character storylines. Again, we're going to get into some spoilers here with that movie, but the 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 character storylines that ended in Avengers Endgame were culminations that were extremely fitting of the entire theme of those characters. And keep in mind that that's over 20 movies over 10 years. So doing it longer and doing it at and more difficult intervals because you're not doing it week by week when you're doing it. And they had very fitting culminations for those characters that their story arcs ended, as opposed to Game of Thrones, which is kind of befuddling it.
Yeah, and as much as I know you're someone that isn't entirely enamored with how Marvel operates with a lot of its films. You have to. I like they gave Tony Stark the perfect send off. They gave Captain America basically the perfect send off. They gave Thor. I think that's one of the more nuanced stories I've seen that I haven't seen enough people really recognize, and how they had his character develop from this meathead demigod into this humbled dude. Like, oh, hey, I don't have to continually put all this pressure on myself. Like how he's basically like a millennial or someone in their early 30s. Like, I can just live my life. I don't have to be this great person all the time. Like, they were able to resolve so many of these main characters like arcs, and that's so difficult. And maybe in a way we rail too much in the Game of Thrones people, but maybe it should be easier if you're keeping track of how, if you're keeping track over 10 years over how all of this develops. It's just so satisfying to see it, and it's so interesting to see it juxtaposed that way.
Yeah, definitely. And to stay on Endgame, I personally cried 4 times watching the movie. I would characterize.
Well, did you see it twice? Did you cry? Did you cry the second time?
The second time I cried, the second time I saw it, I only cried when Tony Stark died, and I didn't cry nearly as much. But I did cry. I did tear up a little bit again. But the first time I saw it, when I say I cried 4 times, I would say I teared up 3 times more than anything, and I cried actually once, which was Iron Man's death. But there was a lot. Like, there was just even moments that weren't the actual end of the story arc, like the actual story arcs. There was so much like culmination that like a lot of it you kind of saw coming, but was still like, it just was very well done and very like fitting. Like, for example, Captain America getting the Mjolnir and being able to hold that and being proven worthy, and Thor saying, "I knew it," which I'm pretty sure Thor, if I remember correctly, Thor says that he believes Captain America is worthy in a past movie. And obviously it happens in the comics. And, it just was such a moment that it's like, it was something that seeing it on screen, it was like it fit everything. Even if Captain America had died, or even if his story arc had not ended in that movie, it was still fitting that he got that moment, because he's been worthy and he's been this like bastion of positivity and bastion of everything you want to say good in the world. And in this big fight where he's trying to protect the world, he gets one of the most powerful weapons possible. It was just so incredible. And then seeing how like in tune he was with the shield, like it was an incredible moment. And then on top of that, like the fight scene, I know that you said the fight scene between Iron Man and Captain America and Thor against Thanos, that was like the best scene, one of the best scenes in the whole series of movies. And just like the whole thing was done so well. And you talked about like the proper send off for Iron Man. The whole thing starts with him saying, "I am Iron Man," and then the whole thing ends with him saying, "I am Iron Man." Like, just how fitting that close of a story arc is, but then also just the fact that he could never rest until he felt like he had saved the world, and then he literally saved the world, and then that's how he ends up dying. He dies to save the world, and Pepper saying, "You can rest." Like that was just such a good closing moment, especially as a drawback to the earlier in the film when she asked, well, would you be able to rest if you didn't do the time heist? Just things like that. It was so well done, and I just really enjoyed the movie.
It's the consummate way of how you should take care of a storyline, and I guess that gives me a good lead in, like, to you, who ended up, like, who were you most satisfied by from this, like, first arc of 22 movies? Like, what left the biggest impression on you?
That's a really good question.
What or who? Obviously, not like
I definitely would say that I think Iron Man, just because he obviously was like the driving force behind it, and that might be kind of the cop out answer, but from the very beginning, like obviously Iron Man was the first movie of the MCU, and they reference it at times, but Tony Stark outing himself as Iron Man in that first movie is really what kind of launches the whole thing. Obviously, like, if we're talking about within that universe, the Earth had existed for so long without knowing that alien life really even existed, without knowing that for sure. And just 4 years after he is claims that he's Iron Man and shows himself to be this valiant warrior, and they end up gathering up this team, they basically end up being invaded by aliens who want to take over the Earth and basically want to wipe out humanity. And just the way it developed for him. And I love his story arc. I love that he constantly has this drive. He can never stop. And just like I think the excellent ways that they called back to some of the stories from earlier, like, when he wanted to build the suit of armor around Earth and just things like that. I thought the whole thing was really good. And I think he had overall the most compelling story in terms of just like the main characters from that first, if you want to call it, if I know it's not officially phase 1, but now that it's kind of ended and we're moving into a new kind of generation of the MCU, if you want to call that phase 1 of the MCU, that was definitely, like, he was the most compelling character for me.
I mean, he was certainly the best actor. I don't think it's necessarily a cop out to say the best actor and best character. Like, the person they certainly put the most effort into. I think they put the most effort into developing Iron Man for a reason. He was the flagship guy. He was the one that always had the big moments. I mean, in their very first big team up, he's the one that saves everybody in the first Avengers. So naturally, they had to bring it all back around full circle for him. But just, and this isn't me trying to be contrarian, but I kind of just touched on it. Like, I like Thor's story. I think. I know you didn't really like Ragnarok and how he all turned around, but I thought Thor kind of sucked when they first introduced him. Like, it was a cool, cheesy novelty, like, so dumb as guardian, like, god that, like, played around well with a hammer, but he wasn't an interesting character. He was just an overpowered beast that yelled really loud when he was in battles and like lost sometimes. Like, they developed him into a human being. Like, they humbled him a little bit. He loses his mom over the course of the series. In Thor: Dark World, he loses his mom. That movie was just
trash,
absolute trash.
Trash.
But he loses his mom, and that affects him. And then he loses his hammer. He loses his dad. He loses Thanos. He loses his brother. And then he loses to Thanos, like his first ever real major loss. And then when he gets a chance at redemption with Thanos, he loses there too. Normally, whenever he would have a second chance, just like the typical hero plot, they lose once and then they win in the climax. Like everything's wrapped up in a neat bow. He didn't get that with Thanos. And then he's like, holy shit, like, maybe I'm not this hot shit. Like, and then holy shit, maybe, like, I shouldn't be, like, living my life on edge and constantly trying to be like this great Asgardian god that has to be an example for all my people. Maybe I should just, like, live my life and use my power for good when need be, but don't put unnecessary pressure on myself. Like, I thought over the last 4 to 5 years, like, they turned him into something beautiful. They turned him into a perfect image of like mental health. I don't want to, like, go on it too much, but I really think this of, like, mental health and, like, anxiety and just, like, people accepting what they are instead of everything. Like to use Thor for that prism, like was so it was so nuanced, and I really appreciated it.
Yeah, and at the same time, along the same lines with Thor, I know you mentioned that I didn't like the Ragnarok, and I didn't like, and I should clarify that when I saw Thor Ragnarok, which I did not see it when it was in theaters, I didn't actually see it until it was actually on, Netflix is when I first saw it.
Mhm.
And I watched it and I thought, wow, this movie was like, I mean, everyone loved this movie. And I basically just thought it was like, okay. And I take major issue. I think that this is something that Marvel has done that has kind of worked its way into film and more than just Marvel. And it's kind of annoying, but there tends to be this tendency to take a big, heavy moment and ruin it with some kind of funny quip that kind of gets a laugh and breaks the tension. And I do take issue at that. And so again, when I first saw Thor Ragnarok and I saw that this was basically just like it taking Thor and Hulk and turning them into punchlines and making them, characters that were not serious anymore, I found it hard to take it seriously because it was supposed to be a joke, but to me that just made it I don't have any investment in that because if they're just there to make me laugh, there's no weight to it. But as you mentioned, watching it develop and kind of looking at it in hindsight, it's definitely something that I think it absolutely was the right direction because like you mentioned, the early Thor movies were not very good and Thor was kind of a bored character, and even Hulk, the most compelling thing about him was that he was Hulk and that he couldn't quite control it, but that only can take you so far. And so kind of taking it to the point where they they had to kind of figure out what to do with it and kind of you mentioned humbling Thor and kind of making it into a funnier, more lighthearted. I definitely think that was a good decision. And then I really hated Hulk, and especially in Endgame, I really hated that they kind of made it into, when you look at back to the first Avengers movie and Bruce Banner says, I'm always angry, and kind of implies that he always has control over whether or not he's Hulk. I think that was kind of ended up getting discarded as more of just kind of like a moment of like a cool line. And they kind of in Infinity War, especially turned it into there's Hulk and there's Bruce Banner and they are separate entities. They're like, it's not the same person. And all of a sudden it was something that was very, to me, frustrating because it was not compelling to me. It was more so just frustrating that they had turned it in from one thing into something completely different. But then in Endgame, the way that they tied it up and how he becomes this like balance and he's Bruce Banner in the body of Hulk was, I think, an incredible character decision, even though we only got it for one movie. And it was kind of ended up being the end of his story arc with him now having snapped and basically being useless. I thought it was a very compelling, finalization of that storyline as well, where he finally found the balance he needed.
That's interesting. So, with all of the information you have now, does Ragnarok even does it at least crack your top 10 of Marvel movies?
I probably have to rewatch it, but I would say my opinion of it is much different. But I would still, in hindsight, the opinion changes a lot. I think I'd probably have to rewatch it. And my wife wanted to do this because she hasn't actually seen all the Marvel movies and she saw Endgame and really, really liked it. And so she wants to now for us to go back and watch them in order in which they came out, which pray for me because I have to sit through those Thor movies and I have to sit through the Hulk movie. But I think it'll be fun to do that. Obviously, it'll take some time. But that might be something that whenever I complete that whole process, I can get back to you and let you know where I actually rank these movies because, honestly, it's been so long since I've seen some of these movies, and I haven't watched the first Avengers movie probably in 4 years. I haven't watched Age of Ultron was on TNT I think a couple weeks ago, and I watched 20 minutes of it, but that movie sucks, so I just stopped watching that. So it just kind of depends. But I would say it's better in hindsight, and so I don't know if it, like I said, I don't know if it climbs into my top 10, but there are only 22 movies, so being in the top 10 still doesn't necessarily make it elite.
Well, I was giving top 10 because I knew for sure you wouldn't put it in top 5, so I was trying to. I was trying to assuage it.
Definitely, yeah. I'm more, you know me. I'm more of like I like the moments that have weight. I like the moments that have seriousness to them. That's part of why, even though I admit that they're not even though I admit they're terrible movies, I don't hate the DC universe. I just wish they had taken a much different direction. I wish that they were better movies, but I don't hate the route they chose in terms of kind of wanting those to have more weight with them. Because I think that when things are serious and have weight, that makes it more compelling. And that's kind of one of the big things about comic books that I always loved growing up. But at the same time, I can appreciate the value of lightheartedness and keeping it entertaining.
Yeah, and this is like a final segue for us. Where do you think Marvel goes next? I'm not gonna account for DC until they like you kind of just alluded to, until they revamp a lot of it, until they start going properly with their characters, not even necessarily making it lighthearted, but making the stories coherent. Like, where do you think this next goes? Who's going to be the next big bad? Who's going to be the leader? Shit like that.
Well, it's tough for me to say who's going to be the next big bad. I think, we talked about it the other day. It'd be very fun to see if it was Doctor Doom. That'd be a compelling one, but I think they might need to find a way to get X-Men involved, or at least the Fantastic Four involved in order for it to be Doctor Doom. But that'd be a fun one. In terms of leadership, I think it's pretty obvious who's going to be the leader of the Avengers moving forward. And to me, it's Spider-Man. And to me, there's no question about it. There's zero coincidence. I mentioned how Tony Stark, the Iron Man kicked off kind of what was that this whole first decade of the Avengers, the MCU, and the fact that Spider-Man is the very first movie coming out after that. And if you watch the trailer, a big theme in the trailer already is who's going to be the next Iron Man. To me, it's pretty obvious that Peter Parker is going to end up taking up the helm as kind of the front man of the Avengers. Spider-Man is one of the most recognizable, superheroes.
Probably realistically.
Did I say was? I meant is.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Spider-Man is one of the most recognizable superheroes and is one of the most popular superheroes. And, the Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire and how good that was and the success of that is obviously one of the big reasons we were even able to have a Marvel Cinematic Universe, because, that kind of showed that there was an appetite for people to watch superhero movies, and that kind of put Spider-Man much more in the limelight. And so I think people still have that connection. And so I think that's the easy front man in terms of Tom Holland being a perfect fit to play that role, a great, a young actor who can lead you into the next decade of movies. I think he's just 22 or 23 years old. So having him kind of be the front man, and Peter Parker, again, the character Peter Parker, the hero Spider-Man, so recognizable, such a huge fan favorite. It's pretty easy choice to me that he's going to be the leader.
Yeah, and I feel like they're keeping that strain going. So Tony had to stay alive, and Tony was the guy that would eventually save all of mankind and all of the universe. And if we make a way too early prediction for, like, I don't know, Avengers Endgame 2 or whatever you call it, a decade from now, like a justifiable title escapes me, but you could totally foresee a thing where, oh, hey, Spider-Man has to be the one that's alive because he sacrifices himself to, like, save everybody from Galactus eating everybody, and then he passes it on to somebody, because I highly doubt Tom Holland's going to want to be this Spider-Man for 20 years. You know what I mean? So and they're just going to keep that string going, like, oh, hey, Tony was the one that started this, and he kept it going with Peter Parker, and then he passes it on, and not necessarily to a mentor, but another person he trusts or something. Like, they certainly it's a testament to them for how they've built the storyline and how they've able to, like, have that underlying foundation throughout it. I guess besides the leader and besides the big bad, I just said Galactus. I'm all about diversity. and I'm all about the direction of the way the Marvel universe is headed. But outside of like Black Panther and outside of like Spider-Man, like I am worried about how they're going to make really this next phase compelling enough. Like Captain Marvel seems pretty one-dimensional now, which if you see how they dealt with Thor, maybe won't be a concern as much in 5 or 6 years. And then you have, you're gonna have what, like a Black Widow prequel. You might bring in some other things. Like I don't see the next phase outside of a few of the characters as being like, oh man, I gotta go watch this. Like I'm not as excited about it as I was like in the build up throughout all of this. And maybe that's just because I'm older now. Maybe because this first phase catered more to our generation. I think this was a point that you brought up. Yeah, I worry about how Marvel's going to develop this next like tier.
Yeah, but I still think that, like, I mentioned the idea of bringing the Fantastic Four in, and
Well, are they going to do that? Are they going to be able to do that?
I think they can, because Disney just acquired Fox, and we talked before about how Fox, kind of eminently owned the Spider-Man trademarks, and I'm pretty sure they had Fantastic Four too, and so they can basically, like, I don't know that they can really do it big time until they maybe phase out the Guardians of the Galaxy, but I still think they can lean heavily on the Guardians. You still have Thor in there, who, his character arc as the Avengers kind of ended, but obviously with it kind of being the Asgardians of the Galaxy, and they can maybe bring some current comic storylines because that's how the comics are right now. They can bring some of that in. You still have Valkyrie, who's the leader of, the Asgardians on Earth now. So there's still some compelling characters out there, and there's still plenty. I think there's still enough minor, supporting superhero characters out there that haven't been brought in yet, that there's still some stuff there that can be done, to kind of really, continue to add to it. But the Fantastic Four is an example, because they own Fox now, they might be able to get the X-Men in. They might have to kind of revamp some X-Men stuff. But yeah, there's stuff that they can do with it, and I think that there's still plenty of direction to go. I know we've both talked about how the level of hype is definitely not there anymore. I love Spider-Man, so I might go to opening weekend of Far From Home, but unless they find a way to really build up ramp the quality back up to how it was, and not even that I'm saying that that's lack of quality, but if they can get back to that hype level, because I think that after Endgame you're dipping considerably, then I'll get back on the train. But for a while, I'm going to be a lot less invested.
Here's the thing: they got to start shaking up that formula a little bit, because it started to get stale in the past few months for me. It started to get stale a little bit after Infinity War. Like you gotta start moving. You gotta start moving that around. You gotta start making the character developments and these. And I mean, you don't really have any origin stories left, at least at the moment. You've got to like get in faster to these, and not just like do your one-liners. And this is where I agree with you, a lot of the criticisms of Marvel. Like, let's ramp it up. Like you've set the bar too high, and now you have to meet that bar every time. Like,
right.
Mediocrity really won't be tolerated, and that's mainly the reason I think that there isn't as much hype for me personally, and probably for you too, like you just said.
Yeah, and I think and along the same lines, when you talk about changing up the formula, I think a key thing that they're going to have to do, which it might sound a little crazy, but they are going to have to start letting some villains live at the end of movies and just be defeated but not killed. And like there's very few villains that have survived the one-off Marvel movies, unless it was an Avengers movie. And even, for example, even Ultron, who was one of the big Avengers villains in the comics, he dies, or
Ultron is the big Avenger villain,
and his story arc is completed in one movie. They're gonna have to start, in order to create some compellingness to it, they're gonna have to start introducing, they might have to introduce the big bad relatively early and have him pop up more often than not. And they don't have to do it where they're defeating him every time, because that, if you get into that formula, it gets stale pretty quickly. But I think he needs to kind of they need to get into that where we have to have an investment in the bad guys too, because otherwise it can lose it could become uncompelling pretty quickly.
Yeah, but I mean, to that point, they haven't really killed Loki yet. Like he's still around. They brought him back. I mean,
No, they didn't bring him back. He's dead. He's literally dead. Like died in Infinity War. Dead. Didn't come back.
no, they gave him the Tesseract, and he's running around somewhere.
Oh,
Endgame.
yeah, in Endgame.
They brought him back, so they kind of.
But then
did do that.
but he. I mean, couldn't you say, because then they had to send Captain America back in time to return the stones,
Right,
so,
but they said their rules don't matter, and they basically said none of it makes sense anyway. So that's to justify everything.
we'll see. I don't know. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I still agree with your point. Like, let's not kill Ultron in one movie. Like, let's try to redo his character again. Like, it would be really nice if they could bring him back. Maybe the things they alluded to in Endgame were like, oh, hey, our time travel shit, like we can do whatever we want. Maybe that's them saying like, hey, we're gonna bring back Ultron. That's probably me making a big reach, but it would be really cool to have him back and actually nail his character this time around. What I would like to see them try to do something like, I think Loki was the only continual villain they kept bringing back. Do that for Black Panther. You know, I think the next thing they teased with Black Panther was like that Aquaman type character, like bringing a tsunami onto Wakanda. Have that guy around for a few movies. You know what I mean? Or if you're going to introduce like Green Goblin or something in the post-credits scene for Far From Home, have him around for a few movies, for Spider-Man as this nemesis. Like, make these, to your point, make these more feel like comics, like episodes of comics, like specific issues of comics, like storylines or whatever. And then that's the way, like, oh, hey, maybe I should see this opening weekend. Maybe I should like come out and see what's in store. Like that'll make it more fun. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, I definitely think that we need to. I want to be able to have an investment in the bad guy. When you like, just for example, and it's definitely a lesser extent, but like I love the Flash TV show. If you've ever watched that on the CW, it has a lot of silliness to it. There's not, but I kind of contradict myself because it's not super serious. But one of the most compelling things is that they always introduce the big bad very early on. There's always several interactions with the big bad. You get to know the big bad before the end comes for the big bad, and it makes it much more compelling when that happens. And so they don't have to introduce whoever it is, but if it's Doctor Doom or whomever else, they don't have to do that in Spider-Man Far From Home. They don't have to do it in the second or even third movie, but eventually we need to start knowing that he's out there beyond just Thanos in an end scene of Avengers. He's saying, I'll do it myself. And beyond just mentions of him, he needs to be there and we need to know what he's doing.
Adam, I have a hot take now that you bring it up, and this is kind of like, I think this is kind of we can kind of wrap it up. The Avengers, first Avengers is really not all that compelling. The Avengers Age of Ultron is obviously a bad movie. And the only reason Infinity War was good was because they focused on the villain for like 2 hours. Like they made it Thanos' story. And if they can condense that kind of storyline and make that more of a focus moving forward, like you're saying, maybe these movies will actually be good. But like, I remember Avengers was good to people because it was the first major team up that was done cohesively, but I think it's a little overrated actually. Avengers Age of Ultron sucks because it's just all over the place. Infinity War is good because they give Thanos such a focus, which is so refreshing, and they do it very well. And then Endgame, Thanos isn't really much of a factor, which disappointed me, but it's good because they resolve all of their other main character story arcs.
Right.
And not mix that up.
Right. Yeah. And I think too, like, if I can hot ticket, if I can circle back a bit, I think they missed a huge opportunity by killing off Killmonger in the Black Panther movie, because Michael B. Jordan's an amazing actor, and they could have had a very compelling, it didn't have to be a big bad, but a compelling character moving forward that kind of the next Loki kind of type, even though he didn't have the magic powers and the space travel, et cetera, it would have been fun to have him around still. So having him dead is tough. But yeah, if they can give us more compelling villains to continue to work with, and I don't necessarily consider Loki that, because Loki kind of became a hero kind of situation.
I mean, Loki's a comic relief character by the end of it all.
And again, that's something that I don't know if I'm super into that idea, but anyway, we should probably wrap up.
Yeah, it's the Blitz Network Radio,
Yes.
semicolon Endgame.
Right.
Go ahead, Adam. Run through your proceedings.
Well, Robert, you mentioned it earlier, but now that you've made it through this half hour of us talking about Game of Thrones and Endgame, follow us on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter @_Adam Hess. That's HESSS as in Sam. Follow Robert on Twitter @Robert Zeglinski. That's ZEG Linsky with an I at the end. Follow the Blitz Network on Twitter @TheBlitzNet, or all of our stuff at patreon.com/BlitzNetwork. Rob, what's your parting shot?
Tyrion and Sansa sit on the Iron Throne, since it matters.
My parting shot, hot take. Jon Snow and Sansa sitting on the Iron Throne.
Oh man, going the incest. All right, that's your
it's Targaryen tradition.
Valar Morghulis.
No, isn't that the second part?
Valar Dohaeris.
Valar Morghulis.
Valar Dohaeris and
Wait.
Valar Morghulis, everybody.
Wait, which one goes first? Because now I think you got me second guessing myself.
Okay, hold on. This is going to be our thing instead of Stay Classy.
Yeah, good point.
We're
going to be these.
Valar Morghulis goes for. Okay, Valar Morghulis.
Valar Dohaeris.